This episode of New Politics was released on the 27th of August, 2022, and produced on the land of the Wongal and Whadjuk people.
Welcome to New Politics. In this episode, the continuing saga of the secret appointments by the Governor-General and former Prime Minister, and the latest opinion polls. What do they mean for the new Labor government and the federal opposition? I'm Eddie Djokovic, editor of New Politics.
I'm David Lewis. You know who I am.
And a big thank you to our new Patreon subscribers. Thanks for signing up. And if you'd like to support New Politics, you can support us through a Patreon subscription. It's just $5 per month for the Ruby Standard supporter level or $10 per month for the Gold Standard supporter level. But whether it's a subscription or if you just want to listen in, read our material online or buy a t-shirt or buy a book, it's all available at newpolitics.com.au, and all of this is a good way to support independent journalism. It's been the big news of the past fortnight. The Liberal Party and the mainstream media wants us all to forget about it, but the issue is far too important for it to be swept under the carpet. And that's the issue of the secret appointments made by the Governor-General and the former Prime Minister, Scott Morrison. The Solicitor-General, Stephen Donoghue, he's advised that the secrecy of these appointments was not consistent with responsible government and not consistent with the intentions of the Australian Constitution. But he also did advise that the appointments were actually valid and legal. And I think this is where the problem lies. There was nothing in place to stop this kind of political behaviour, and this has to change. And despite all the debate and analysis that has taken place since this news became available, we still haven't been provided with a worthwhile reason for why these arrangements were made in the first place.
It hasn't gotten any easier. Now, Scott Morrison has said he's going to cooperate with any official inquiry, and I suppose that's all he can say. He shouldn't come out of this unscathed, I think. And as you mentioned, the newspapers have said, it's totally valid, it's totally valid. But when you read the finer print in their articles, it was a scathing report that there's no way that under good governance, transparency and democratic process, there's absolutely no way that this should have been even considered. And it'd be interesting to know, and you can bet that this stuff's going to come out. Someone is going to start to leak who was either overridden in their advice. And given the pattern in Scott Morrison's behaviour in his corporate life, it's more likely that he was told you shouldn't do this and has done it anyway. And I point to the precedent, of course, of the Where the Bloody Hell Are You campaign for the Australian Tourism Board, which was one of the big flops and was put through purely on his own cognizance, ignoring everybody else's advice and collaborative ideas. So it wouldn't surprise me if this was himself. And of course, the other thing too is that the narrative is that it was all Scott Morrison. The rest of us had nothing to do with it. Now he's out of the picture. We don't have to really do much more because the public hated Scott Morrison and he was bad politics. Now there was that internal review, which, as I've previously mentioned, was actually a very good and a very hard and a very brave review that went through a lot of other issues that the current Liberal Party has. But the public narrative is that it's all Scott Morrison, and this will give that faction a chance to say, see, we told you so. They're not exactly wrong, to be fair too.
Oh, this also goes to an issue that you've referred to quite frequently in the past, that our system of government and politics depends on the goodwill of the people that make up that system. But it seems that there are no legal ramifications for people of ill will or people who get involved in politics with ulterior motivations, and we're still not sure why Scott Morrison did all of this and why he did it in secret or why he needed to do it in secret. Some people have suggested that he is a control freak and didn't trust his ministers. Some people have suggested that it's all related to that Pentecostal idea of the Seven Mountains mandate of controlling all the key institutions of society. But I think that whatever the case was, it seems that The current situation means that you can drive a truck through the Constitution and maybe even a train and a jumbo jet as well and still have no legal consequence. Now, it could be argued that there ultimately was some kind of checks and balances where Morrison was voted out at the last election, but it wasn't because of this. And whatever the case was, I don't think that's really enough anyway. The Solicitor General, he has suggested that this can all be cleaned up by publishing all the appointments under Section 64 of the Constitution in the Commonwealth Gazette, and that's whether the Prime Minister or Governor-General publicise it or not, and that this can be done through legislation and statutory requirements rather than through a costly referendum change to the Constitution. So the good news is that the problem can be easily fixed, but we never should have got to this stage in the first place anyway. The fact that it occurred, this still really troubles me, and you're left wondering, well, what else was going on that we don't know about, and in some cases we'll probably never know about?
One of the ghosts that popped up again was the Ruby Princess. Some people pointed out that Morrison was sworn in as Secret Health Minister the week before the Ruby Princess docked. One of the many things that is an unanswered question is who gave the final decision. Now, there are dots there that can be joined. Whether they were joined or not, a different thing. But certainly there was a Pentecostal convention on at the time. There were rumours that I don't think have ever been substantiated of various ministers' families or in-laws being on the boat. The New South Wales Health blamed the Commonwealth blamed New South Wales Health. My only comment there is that the only people who can control who can come in and out of the country is the federal government. New South Wales can't really stop anyone entering the country. They can sort of stop people coming from other states, as we saw in the lockdown, for valid reasons. But if someone's from overseas, they can dock in Sydney and the New South Wales government can do nothing about it. We have all kinds of other decisions that seemed odd and strange and even out of character for the minister at the time, which may suggest Scott Morrison making those decisions and signing off as minister. A lot of it we'll never know because there's not a lot of documentation. I doubt we'll find a memo or a directive or a circular signed by Scott Morrison, Minister for Health, let the Ruby Princess dock and get everyone off because this has got to happen. A lot of this will have been verbal, if it happened at all. Let's be fair, it may not have happened. But circumstantial evidence is a funny thing. Sherlock Holmes quotes Henry David Thoreau saying it's like a trout in the milk. It may mean nothing, but there's something suggestive about it sometimes. Again, I wonder if the people who apparently loathe Scott Morrison will slowly come out of the woodwork under conditions of anonymity and to save papers and admit this was a decision made by him. Be interesting to see. Kangaroo Court of Australia has already found allegations in the way that Shane can do that. New Daily has suggested things as well. And I'm not saying that these guys are wrong at all. I'm saying that things are starting to come out. I just wonder who's going to break the big story showing that Scott Morrison was much more responsible for things that nobody liked than perhaps he or anyone else wanted to admit at the time.
And just picking up on that point that you referred to before about the media responses, I think it has been interesting to see the responses of the mainstream media and the Liberal Party, of course, which are pretty much one and the same on most matters. Now, they have been highlighting the legality of all of this in their news headlines, but reducing the part of irresponsible government down to the small print. And I don't think that we're exaggerating when we say that this is one of the biggest assaults on parliamentary democracy in Australia. But the coalition just seems to want everyone to just forget about it. And just on the weekend, we had Barnaby Joyce saying that he's more interested in talking about small nuclear reactors and the price of lettuce. And the deputy leader of the Liberal Party, Susan Ley, she was talking about all of this being in the rear view mirror. That's another term that was used by Scott Morrison during his prime ministership. And she suggested the public has moved on and therefore it's time for the Labor government to move on as well. Stuart Robert has claimed that an investigation isn't needed because Scott Morrison was punished by losing the election. And that's a little bit like arguing that a guilty criminal of a major crime doesn't need any jail time because they've already been publicly humiliated by a court trial. And the media is in cahoots with the Liberal Party here. Here's Ali Langton and Karl Stefanovic using all of the same Liberal Party talking points and directing them towards the Attorney General, Mark Dreyfus.
So he's been cleared, but as far as the law goes, is that the end of the matter now?
It's not the end of the matter. We've had a deeply alarming advice here from the Solicitor General about how Scott Morrison appointing himself to 5 ministries really undermined our system of responsible government.
So there's already things in place that you're going to do to ensure that if someone does that, that you're going to know about it with the Commonwealth Gazette. But I think Scott Morrison has said that he will take part in an inquiry if it is, and I quote, genuine process to learn lessons from the pandemic. So he wants it to be broader than what he did, to include the states and territories. Would you look at that?
Of course he wants it to be broader, and of course he wants to hide behind the pandemic. This had nothing to do with the pandemic. This was just a power grab by Mr Morrison, appointing himself to 5 ministries. It's deeply concerning. The inquiry is going to be about that, and I welcome Mr Morrison saying he'll cooperate, and he should.
I guess there's a feeling that maybe Albo can drop it now, that he's getting obsessed by Scott Morrison. Is it time just to move on, given that it wasn't against any law, and that you're making small changes anyway?
This is serious. It's a serious breach of convention. It's a deeply alarming advice from the Solicitor General. That's why we're going to do this. The inquiry is going to look at what we can do to change the law to make sure it never happens again.
And to me, it's a little bit like when the captain of a rugby league team or AFL team is caught out with a rape allegation or a drug allegation, and their supporters will defend them until they die in a ditch over it, and they totally overlook the wrongdoing of their team. And it's the same here. Morrison and David Hurley, they've totally overstepped the mark here, but every excuse in the book is being used to condone their actions. And Tony Soprano from the Sopranos TV series, he did once say that remember when is the worst form of conversation. So should we try and remember all of the secret arrangements, or is it time to move on and just forget about the past?
Speaking as a historian, forgetting about the past is not generally recommended. And the stroke of luck we had is that Morrison wasn't terribly competent. He was dishonest enough and unethical enough to do it, but he wasn't competent enough to pull it off. Now, he got away with it till after the election, let's be fair. But it was his incompetence in everything else that made him lose the election. It wasn't that the people didn't punish him for this because, well, we didn't know. So it's a little bit disingenuous for Peter Dutton to suggest, well, he's been punished because he lost the election. That's not why he lost the election. The other thing is that Morrison, had he been a more capable and competent leader, had he been a John Howard, say, Howard would never consider this as a thing to do. As much as I disliked him as Prime Minister, and I disliked him a lot, he was on the side of you had to work within the limits of constitutional practice and convention. But imagine if he'd done it. We'd be living in a dictatorship. We'd be living in a Christo-fascist dictatorship. And those journalists who are now saying, he did nothing illegal, suggesting he's been cleared by the Solicitor General, are really not doing themselves or the country any favours.
Well, this is only the beginning of the investigation as well. So the Solicitor General's advice referred to just the question of whether this was legal or not. But Prime Minister Albanese, he's announced that after discussing the issue with his cabinet, a broader inquiry will be required. And this has got the possibility of being a very, very slow burn for the Liberal and National parties. Albanese did say during the last election campaign that he would be a considered and a cautious Prime Minister, and so far he's doing things in a more measured and controlled way, and especially when compared with the actions of Tony Abbott and Scott Morrison, who always acted in haste to try and score political damage against the Labor Party. Now, without a question, Labor is going to milk this issue for as long as it can. That's how politics operates. The Coalition did it with the Royal Commissions into the trade unions and the Pink Bats insulation scheme, and I'd say that trying to usurp ministerial powers in a secret arrangement with the Governor-General is a far, far bigger issue than who paid for Julia Gillard's bathroom renovations 30 years ago, or Bill Shorten trying to find a 10-year-old invoice. And these were the big issues that the Royal Commission into trade unions tried to uncover, big deal. And this is, for me, a neat segue into the creation of a federal independent commission against corruption. And once these commissions are established, it's hard to know exactly where they'll lead. And Anthony Albanese has also just announced a royal commission into the robo-debt scandal. So The Labor government will continue with these inquiries because it's got the power to do so now, and the opposition is complaining about how this new government is spending too much time examining what the former government did. And it's a little bit hard to accept this criticism from the opposition. They've got a few former ministers who had to stand down for different misbehaviours. Alan Tudge for assorted sexual harassment, Stuart Robert for rorting internet expenses to the tune of $38,000, Bridget McKenzie for the sports affairs, Susan Lowe for going off to purchase a Gold Coast apartment while she was on official government business. So, of course, they don't want the government to look into the actions of the coalition while they were in government, because there'll be a lot of information to uncover, and it's going to be very, very embarrassing for the Liberal Party and for the National Party. But the other factor is, and David, you and I have talked about this quite often in the past, but the bigger issue is that they don't seem to understand that what they're doing is corrupt. Scott Morrison almost creates a constitutional crisis, but then makes fun about it on social media and posts his responses to it on Facebook. Also, that idea of corruption, it festers because people in office don't understand what it is. And we've seen this on all sides of politics. And when it does happen, the players involved, politicians and the media, especially the conservative media interests, they always try to play it down. And for me, the irony in this case is that for well over 2 years, News Corporation has been pushing that message of Dictator Dan in Melbourne and asserted that the Victoria Premier, Daniel Andrews, is corrupt and he's authoritarian, and without any proof at all. They also pushed that message against Queensland Premier Anastasia Palaszczuk, also against the Premier of Western Australia, Mark McGowan, when all along it was their main man, Scott Morrison. He was the one that was behaving like a dictator, and he was the one who behaved corruptly. And this is no longer an assertion that we could just sort of make quite frivolously. We've actually got the proof for his corruption and his political misbehaviour.
He's been caught red-handed. He's been caught doing something that the authors of the Constitution never considered. I think that a lot of the government's time now is going to be tied up closing these loopholes, because we now know that it's possible for somebody with a low enough ethical boundary can subvert the Constitution. Now, as is said, a Governor-General could say, I'm going to appoint other people. We've had the election, but I'm going to have my friend as the Prime Minister, and the Executive Council is going to be made up of all the people in my poker-playing club as the Executive Council, and I'm in charge of the army and I'm just going to run a military dictatorship. Under the Constitution, you can go to that or something close to that. But we've never needed to have worried about it, because up until this point, everyone in the role, even the ones we don't like, even the ones we thought were unfit for office, up until Morrison, none of them would have considered it. All of them realised, and that's Governors General, Prime Ministers and Attorneys General, and most Cabinet, and probably nearly every backbencher as well, understood the power and the symbolism and the tradition and the legitimacy of the conventions that we inherited from essentially the British and the American system. But they understood how important it was. And for it to come from the Liberal Party, the party that really leaned on the institutions of government as a thing that were worth preserving, worth protecting, and worth ensuring that they would be there for as long as they possibly could be, makes it somehow worse. I wouldn't excuse it if it was a left-wing radical Labor Prime Minister, but you could understand it a little bit more. But it turns out that it's the Labor Party in their current forms that prefer the system to work as efficiently as it was meant to work, and the Liberal Party in its current, but let's be fair, probably trying to evolve in some kind of way, that was ready, willing, and, as it happened, able to ride roughshod over it. We need to have statutes or legislation or something more than an unspoken agreement that there are certain things that we do and do not do that don't need to be written down. We now, thanks to the fourth-rate, nobody forgettable figure of Scott Morrison, we need to write this down and say to people, this is what you do and this is what you don't do. And I'm a bit sad about that.
You're listening to New Politics. You can subscribe to us on Apple or Google Podcasts, listen through Amazon Music, Spotify, YouTube and SoundCloud, or you can find us at newpolitics.com.au. And you can also support New Politics through Patreon.
There's a new set of opinion polls from Resolve and Essential, and they're pretty much showing similar results. The upshot is that the new Labor government is travelling well and the Liberal and National parties are not. The Liberal Party did claim in the election campaign that nothing would be easy under Albanese, but it seems that the polls are quite easy at the moment. The Resolve poll is published by Nine Media, and it shows that Labor's primary vote is up almost 10 percentage points, and that's resulting in a 61 to 39% two-party preferred lead. 61% believe Prime Minister Anthony Albanese is doing a good job for a net approval rate of 39 points, and that's up from -8 in the previous Resolve poll just before the election, so that's a massive 47-point turnaround. The opposition leader, Peter Dutton, he's got a net approval rating of -8, and Albanese is preferred Prime Minister by 55% to 17%. And we do have to remember that John Howard was at 18% as opposition leader in 1988, but went on to become Prime Minister after 3 changes in the opposition leadership and 8 years later. So there is a glimmer of hope for Peter Dutton, but in the present time, things are not travelling so well for him.
I don't think Dutton is anywhere near as competent as John Howard. And again, I don't want to come out as being a Howard booster. You won't find a John Howard t-shirt in the New Politics shop just yet. But we have to be fair, because if we start to give our political opponents attributes they don't have and take away attributes they do have, it becomes a lot harder to criticise them and debate breaks down. Guy Rundle did a really great quarterly essay where he pointed out, let's look at this guy's good point. He's at 18%. He'd fought all his life to become leader of the Liberal Party. He gets stabbed in the back by his best friends, and the next day he is out fighting for the Liberal Party and Liberal values. This takes a lot of guts, a fair bit of character, and a fair bit of internal strength. When Malcolm Turnbull stepped down as Prime Minister, nobody blamed him. And it was similar circumstances, except Howard was leader of the opposition and could still believe in the dream that he would be Prime Minister one day. Turnbull had had his go as Prime Minister and it had not gone so well. And he stopped really fighting for the Liberal Party in the way that John Howard has never stopped. Again, I do want to point out the differences in that Turnbull had got there and had a far worse time as Prime Minister than Howard did, and could have expected maybe better behaviour as Prime Minister. But that's a whole other debate for a whole other day. Peter Dutton, I don't think, has these reserves of strength of character. I'm not sure he could articulate what Liberal values are, at least the ones that are palatable to the Australian public. He sues people for deleted Twitter posts, gets very cranky at people who mildly criticise him. And I think that's the trouble with Dutton, that he needed to have 30 or 40% and try and maintain that, and he hasn't been able to. It's a very jumpy party. It's a very hurt party too. When Howard was at 18%, the Liberal Party had already had 4 or 5 years of opposition against the powerhouse voting machine of Bob Hawke too. Hawke's popularity had dropped somewhat as well, which made Howard's a little worse. At the moment, of course, Anthony Albanese is rating extremely highly for good reasons.
Oh, well, I guess my point is that you can never underestimate any political leader as well. It doesn't matter how poorly they're travelling right now. And it did take 8 years for John Howard to improve from 18% as opposition leader to become Prime Minister later on. So it takes a little while, but it can be done. But the figures for Anthony Albanese in those opinion polls, they are high, but it's not unusual for opinion polls to be this high after a change election. But I think it's also the result of Anthony Albanese just seeming to be like a normal person rather than the dysfunctional characters that we've had leading the government over the past decade or so. And it's only early days. All leaders change once they get into office, and sure, Albanese might go through some unforeseen personality changes over the next 3 years that were completely unpredictable. But so far, the calm and cautious approach that Albanese did talk about during the election campaign, as I referred to before, that seems to have carried through into government. And I get the feeling that these are the broad, slow and patient brushstrokes in the creation of a new government. It's something new and something different, whereas the Abbott, Turnbull, Morrison governments, they just seem to be a continuation of the Howard era, the same personalities, the same ideology, same policies, same inertia. And if anything, Albanese has publicly said that he'll use the template of the Hawke government for his direction, and whether this is successful or not, only time will tell. But I'd much rather use Bob Hawke as a model for government than John Howard. And the Liberal Party always draws on Robert Menzies for their source of inspiration. So is it okay for Albanese to draw on the experiences of Bob Hawke, or should he just run his own race?
We're 40 years down the track from Bob Hawke. 40 years next year, I think. So the Australian landscape has changed, in some ways for the better, in some ways not so much. Labor tends to be a little bit more aware of its history than the Liberal Party. There are some very fine Liberal historians out there, but your typical Labor branch leader will know names such as Charlton, who led the party in the 20s, Evatt, who led the party in the 50s, and their details, much more so than a Liberal Party member could tell you who J.G. Latham or Brendan Nelson were, or their input to the party. And that's partly because the Labor Party needed, particularly in the past, to defend itself from itself, much more so than the outside. The Liberal Party was always a little bit more consistent in its philosophy across the country, whereas the Labor Party wasn't. The Tasmanian Labor Party was a totally different beast to the Victorian Labor Party. So I think that Albanese is probably aware of that. Bob Hawke, I believe, too, was somewhat of a hero to Albanese, and I think somewhat of a mentor. And so there's that. And to use the notion of the Hawke government in terms of its broader philosophical aims, I don't think it's a bad thing. But if you try and replicate it down to the last comma, you're going to run into problems because we live in a fundamentally different country. And yes, it should be honoured and remembered.
Well, Bob Hawke came into office in 1983 to resolve many of the issues that had been left behind by the Fraser government. And it seems that Anthony Albanese is also coming into office at a time of many issues that need to be resolved as well. And he seems to be keen to resolve many of these issues that festered and were left behind or left unattended by the previous government. And one of those is the current skill shortages in early education, aged care, engineering trades, digital skills and teaching. And it's not a case where skill shortages just appear out of nowhere. Governments do have the ability to detect where the shortages are and have the ability to address these issues through long-term measures. And it is a bit of a risky area because it takes around 4 or 5 years of planning to turn these skill shortages around. And the areas that you define now might not be the areas where there are skill shortages in 5 years' time, but you do have to do something about it. And it does appear that the previous government totally neglected this area. Now, we can say that the pandemic caused some of the skill shortages, but that's because immigration was always used as a quick fix to skill shortages. And when immigration fell to zero during the early part of the pandemic, well, that quick fix was no longer available. So there is a job summit commencing next week, and this is something that Bob Hawke also did when he first came into office in 1983, where a lot of these issues will be addressed. Peter Dutton has decided not to show up, and that's his choice, of course. But there's a key element of symbolism here, and that's of relevance. And for sure, this is Albanese's show. This is the Labor government show. But even as an observer, which is what the Nationals leader David Littleproud is doing, you'd think that it would be in Peter Dutton's political interests and the interests of the Liberal Party to actually be there.
You'd think so, but again, they're not very good picking up what is in their best political interest. They're so wrapped up in their philosophy that they'll cut their toe off rather than walk into a job summit to show that they care about Australia in the way that people think they should care about Australia. They would rather not understand the political damage it's doing in the hope that the people who are talking to them will say, yeah, you shouldn't go because it's no good and it's not going to be. Meanwhile, the rest of Australia looks at them and says, you could have put in your ideas. And maybe some of them were good ideas. Probably not, but you never know. The thing is, having a soft press for so long, their ideas will get a run in the Australian. Their ideas will get a run in the various state dailies like the Telegraph and the Herald Sun and the Advertiser and the Courier Mail, etc. The trouble is that nobody's reading them. And instead of having a valid voice at the table, they're just shouting into the wind and wondering why no one's shouting back.
Oh, well, all the opposition is doing at the moment is bagging Labor, saying that they need to focus on the future, not the corruption of the past, and claiming that events such as the Jobs Summit will be a stunt, complaining about all the things that Labor should be doing now, even though they did nothing about it while they were actually in government. And all they've got at the moment are the ideas that they never got around to implementing themselves. They want small nuclear reactors introduced. They want to lower the means testing for pensioners so they can earn more income. They want the power crisis resolved. They want skill shortages resolved. They've got this bizarre idea of offering refunds to university students for bad learning experiences, whatever that might be. Now, some of these might be good ideas, some of them not, some of them are plain stupid, but the point is that they never addressed any of these issues or even attempted any of them while they were in office for over 9 years. And it seems like they're developing into this culture of complaint that ultimately, as far as I can see, will get them nowhere. And that was the result of the 2021 Western Australia election, where 4 years of opposition for opposition's sake resulted in the Liberal Party holding just 2 seats in the WA Parliament. The Liberal Party in Victoria is facing a state election in November, and their current polling is 39% to 61% for the Labor Party in two-party preferred voting. And the evidence is all around them. A recent federal election loss, poor national polling, losing elections badly all around Australia, poor polling in Victoria, a Liberal government in New South Wales that is also performing poorly with their election due in March 2023. So all of this evidence, and it seems like they just cannot learn from experience and can't learn from all the evidence that's being provided to them. Now, I know that it's not possible for a political organisation to change immediately, but something has to drastically change for the Liberal Party. They might have to receive some more electoral punishment to finally get the message, because it seems that at the moment they're just a little bit hard of hearing what these messages are.
As harsh as it is to say, these electoral wipeouts are actually good for them, because getting rid of the people who should never have got anywhere near a seat, and that includes the last Prime Minister. It includes most of the last federal cabinet. It includes the Victorian Liberal Party. It includes most of the Western Australian Liberal Party. It includes most of the New South Wales Liberal Party. Tasmania and South Australia are a little bit different, but sometimes you just have to clean everything out. No one but themselves to blame. They've had the softest press. A lot of them had control of both houses of parliament, or at least an easier upper house. They've just shown themselves to be so unfit for office that their handpicks are losing. All of Scott Morrison's handpicked, parachuted in candidates not only lost, but lost at a much greater margin than any other candidate would have, it seems. Had a normal Liberal got in, they'd have won a lot of those safe seats. And those that they mightn't have had a chance of winning, they'd have been a bit closer. So there's all these ex-Liberals who ran for pre-selection who didn't get it and lost out to inferior candidates, who now, like, say, Daly and Fowler, may run as independents and take another seat, really, off the Liberals, let alone the other Teal candidates, most of whom were natural Liberal voters, or at least swinging voters who were quite happy to consider Liberal policy each election. So that unelectable, incompetent, corrupt, un-Australian membership has to be cleaned out of the Liberal Party, and I think the only way to do that is really electorally, because I don't think the Liberal Party themselves have the strength at the moment to do the hard yards of purging. So that let the people do the purge, and then your better candidates can hopefully come back in and we get an opposition that is worthy of the name.
You're listening to New Politics. You can subscribe to us on Apple or Google Podcasts, listen through Amazon Music, Spotify, YouTube and SoundCloud, or you can find us at newpolitics.com.au. And you can also support New Politics through Patreon.
Love will
And just to point on what politicians get up to in their private lives, News Corporation had a field day when they complained about Anthony Albanese going to a gig at the Enmore Theatre. They complained about him going to the gig in the first place and then complained that he was wearing a Joy Division t-shirt, not very Prime Ministerial, and he should have been wearing a suit. Now, I've actually seen a suit in a mosh pit, but it just didn't look right. It just didn't fit in. But all we can say is that there probably isn't enough joy at News Corporation and there's probably too much division. If anything, I'd be critical of the age of the music. The music of a Joy Division is over 40 years old. Now, we've been critical of Morrison and his performative stunts and being someone who he isn't and how all of that ended up on social media, but Albanese going to gigs, well, that's who he is. He follows the Smashing Pumpkins, the Ramones, Billy Bragg, PJ Harvey, the Triffids, the Saints. He's a product of that new wave and punk music era, and it's all a little bit old and dated now, but, you know, he's also DJ Elbow, and he's been doing this for most of his adult life. But should a Prime Minister give up all of these things just because they become the Prime Minister? Music is the essence of life, and politicians engaged with music is something that should be encouraged as far as I'm concerned. And we also had that issue of the Finnish Prime Minister, Sanna Marin, criticised for partying at home, and for some reason this became international news. Sanna Marin is 36 years old, and that's pretty impressive to be a Prime Minister at the age of 36. I think I was probably still holed up somewhere at the Judgment Bar in Darlinghurst when I was 36. But the idea of how a Prime Minister should be presented to the public, now we want to see a real person in there somewhere, not some fake confected public image, which is what we saw from Scott Morrison when he was Prime Minister. And I think if people want the pomp and ceremony, well, that can all be left to the Governor-General, in between swearing in secret ministries, of course. But is all of this fair game, or should political leaders be able to have their private lives and their private interests as well?
If a Prime Minister's private life doesn't impinge on public funding, if they're not funding their rose garden through inappropriate use of public funds, let them be. We've had quite a lot of Prime Ministers who loved the football or the cricket, or in some cases both, and would sneak off on a Saturday afternoon to go and watch a game or a half a game, or time their important overseas meetings with a test at Lord's. But that's actually okay. It's when it's used improperly. Anthony Albanese goes to a gig. Who cares? Paul Keating would go to the opera. And there's a little bit of classism in there, isn't it? That it was all right for Paul Keating to have highbrow tastes and wear a suit to the opera, whereas for Anthony Albanese to wear a T-shirt and to go to the Enmore Theatre to watch, oh, for God's sake, a rock show is somewhat a bit snobby and a bit elitist. And as long as it's a genuine thing, it doesn't bother me. Now, if he'd never attended a rock show before and never worn a T-shirt and had never shown any interest in music and then suddenly turns up, like other Prime Ministers we might mention, we'd be very suspicious. One of the key things about being a successful leader is that notion of authenticity. If Anthony Albanese turned up to the opera and not, say, Carmen or Turandot or one of the big ones, but went and saw the Salome or something less well-known, we'd all be thinking, what's going on here? What's he trying to prove to us? And, of course, Prime Ministers have to do things that they don't like. And it might be that he had to meet the Japanese consul and that they gave him tickets to the opera. But that type of thing can be explained. It's when a lifelong union man suddenly starts moving to a popular league seat, is suddenly the local team's number one fan while barely understanding the game, that you run into problems. I suspect this is a tiny storm in a teacup. I suspect it is a bit of classism, a bit of snobbery, and a little bit of confected outrage to try and get a hook into him anywhere they can. It's like the Finnish Prime Minister, a relatively young woman, going and dancing in a nightclub. Good grief. As a few people have pointed out here, imagine if she'd tried to undermine the constitution of Finland. At least she didn't wear a Gang of Four t-shirt. I think good old Australian suburban snobbery has raised its ugly head.
That's it for this episode of New Politics. Thanks for listening in. If you'd like to support our style of journalism and commentary, please make a donation at our website at newpolitics.com.au. We don't beg, plead, beseech or gaslight you about journalism coming to an end. We just keep it very simple. If you like what we do, please send some support our way. It keeps our commitment to independent journalism ticking along. I'm Eddie Djokovic. Thanks for listening in, and it's goodbye to our listeners.
I'm David Lewis. We'll see you next time.